Your worldwide news, live from Moscow. This is RT International. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. We start with breaking news this hour. Twin blasts have hit the Syrian city of Homs. State media reports around 14 people killed. According to local medics, at least 17 people have been injured. Police say one of the attacks may have been carried out by a suicide bomber. Now, Dr. Jamal Wakim, Professor of History and International Relations at Lebanese International University, now joining us live here on RT International. Thanks for coming on, and good to see you. While you're not in Syria, you are ultimately in the region. Do you know any further details about this latest attack in Homs?
Well, I only know what I heard from news about the developments and about the number of killed people and injured. So this is the best I could do so far.
All right, so we understand that today's attack comes just a day after international diplomats were holding a new round of talks on a peace solution. Do you find any coincidence in the timing of the peace talks and the suicide blast?
Well, I can relate the suicide blast to the developments in Aleppo rather than to the diplomatic developments regarding the Syrian crisis. I believe that the military groups that are fighting in Syria, once they are about to lose Aleppo, the second biggest city in Syria, they are reverting to other means of confrontation with the regime and its allies by reverting to suicide bombs and by targeting cities that were neutralized in the past by the regime forces. And we will see more and more of these blasts in the coming future.
And do you think we'll see more and more of these blasts in the coming future because the international coalition against terrorism in Syria is actually being successful?
Well, I believe that we will see more operations like the one in Homs, not because of the international coalition, but rather because of the Russian intervention that tilted the balance to the favor of the Syrian government and to the Syrian army, and that is causing the Syrian regime to be able to re-establish its control over wide areas in Syria, which will eventually give it the upper hand in any future negotiations with its opponents and with the powers that are supporting the military groups or the armed insurgents who are fighting the Syrian regime. So I believe that we will see more and more of these operations, not only targeting Homs, but other areas, including Damascus. And this will be the new mean for government supporting the insurgents to establish a foothold on the Syrian ground in order to use it as a way to bargain and have a stake in the upcoming negotiations.
Well, Dr. Wakim, you bring in my next question ultimately, because what's the future for the peace talks if the situation on the ground is still so tense, volatile, and ultimately unpredictable?
Well, I believe that we wouldn't see any breakthrough in the coming few months. We need to wait the election of a new president in the United States because the political situation or the political solution needs to have on the table the major players, not only the local players, but also the regional and international players, because we need to admit that the Syrian crisis has acquired a geopolitical dimension, a regional and international geopolitical dimension, and it's not a local crisis. It's like the arena in which great powers are bargaining to see the prospects of a new world order. We are shifting from unipolar to a multipolar system, and the great powers need to establish a new formula to deal with each other's.
Well, I think it's a bit of a shame, Dr. Wakim, that you say that when it comes to the peace process in Syria, we almost have to wait for America to get involved. Ultimately, the presidential election ongoing. It's going to be many months now before we have a new president in the White House in America. The humanitarian situation in Syria is dire. Is there something that can be done immediately to help the people in Syria?
Well, this depends on the regional and international powers involved in the conflict. if they are willing to appease the civilian population by lifting some of the pressure off them, which is unlikely in these circumstances, not only because the United States or Western powers are involved in the conflict, but because regional powers like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, who thought that they were marginalized by their allies, by the United States, they need to still have a stake in what's going on in Syria. And this is one way for them to support armed insurgents and not to solve the humanitarian problem until further notice.
Dr. Wakim, I've got very little time left, but I just want to ask you one more very brief question. A colleague of mine at RT Arabic is a presenter. He's a Syrian. I asked him, what is the end game in Syria? And he told me, when all the external players in Syria get out and leave it for a sovereign future for the Syrian people. What's your take on that?
Well, this is very utopian and ideal, because we need to admit that in the past 2 centuries, the local political scene got mixed with the regional and international levels, and we cannot separate one level from the other. I wish this could be true, and that Syrians could solve their problems on their own. But too bad, the Syrian crisis, as other crises, acquired a regional and international dimension, and there are a lot of variables that need to be taken into consideration before we could reach a final solution for the crisis. All
right, Dr. Jamal Wakim, Professor of History and International Relations at Lebanese International University. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.